Hi, everyone. I'm Dawn Nagy, the Director of Strategic Advancement here at the World Federation of Youth Clubs, and we are so excited to have you join us today for our session on fundraising success, what comes before the ask. We are joined here today by three experts. We're so excited to have their expertise here with us, and so I'm going to take a minute to just have them introduce themselves. We're joined by Bernard Boudreau, Kelly Crow, and Kira Pritchard, and they represent a broad range of kind of public-private institutions. And so we've got foundation representation, corporate, public funding, all represented here. So we're hoping to have a really engaging conversations because they have a really great background to share. So we're going to start. Let's just go alphabetical, if you don't mind. Bernard, go ahead and give us a little bit about your background and what you're doing now.
Perfect. Thanks, Dawn. As Dawn said earlier, my name is Bernard Boudreau. I live in beautiful, sunny Northern California. For the first 40 years of my career, I worked in various corporations here in the United States, mostly on the western part of the United States. In the past several years, I'm leading a program at Georgetown University, specifically focused on nonprofit fundraising and revenue generation. So currently, that's my day job. I talk about how nonprofit organizations can raise and earn money, period.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Bernard. Kelly, how about you? Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Kelly Crow. I work with a nonprofit consulting firm called First Pick. We work with youth nonprofits around the country and around the world, mainly to reach out to public and federal sources of funding. I also have experience working overseas, particularly in Africa. Most of my expertise has been in raising money from public and federal sources, and so that'll be primarily what I'm sharing with you today.
Awesome. And where are you, Kelly?
Oh, I'm located in New Jersey.
Awesome. Thank you. Kira?
Hi there. Hi, everyone. I'm Kira Pritchard. I'm a program officer with the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, based in its New York office. My background is primarily in arts and culture and youth development, and the foundation has a very broad mission working across arts, education, health, and social welfare. So really have a very broad mission, and excited to be here with you all today. And thanks so much to the World Federation of Youth Clubs for hosting us. This will be a great discussion.
Oh, we're so excited you're all here. As we mentioned in the session description, right, this is really about what is coming before the ask. Kind of, are you prepared? Have you done your homework? All those kinds of things to make sure that you're the most successful as you can be. So the format is just, I'm going to ask them some questions, and then I would encourage all of you to put any questions that you have along the way in the chat, the kind of the Q&A feature there in the chat. And so those will be coming in for us as well. So I'm going to ask, and then we'll switch and we'll take some questions direct from the audience. So I think what we should start with probably is just pretty much just some basics, right? Like each of you have experience from different funding sources. And so what would you say are some of the requirements for that particular area, right? So let's start with Kira, maybe like if I'm an affiliate and I'm going to be reaching out to a foundation, I'm sure all foundations are different that I've worked with, but there's some basics that they should be able to kind of benefit from. So please share what those might be.
Yeah, absolutely, Dawn. And you're completely right in that many foundations operate very differently, in a large part due to their mission. And so just like, every nonprofit, here in the States, a 501c3 is registered with a particular mission statement. Foundations are very much the same in terms of having their funding align with specific program areas or topics of interest. So to elaborate a little bit further, what I said in my intro, the Niarchos Foundation, we're working across many program areas at a very global scale, but you have other foundations that may focus just on a particular program area, such as the arts or health, and it may even be restricted to a certain geographic location, international, a specific state or country or even region. So, I think what's most important when thinking about foundation and wanting to partner and engage with foundations is really understanding what are their parameters in terms of their mission and in terms of just their funding guidelines. And I think, with the current age we live in, a lot of that stuff you can start to find online. Foundations have, their own websites, and you can also find in some, great directories as well, resources such as Foundation Center or Candid. So there's some really good information that's out there.
Wonderful. Kelly, Bernard, anything else to add from that, from another side, from corporate or public funding?
Kelly, you go, and then I'll follow you, Kelly.
I think very much similar. When you're talking about public funding, you have to look at the priorities depending on where you are. The agency or the central government may have different priorities that change from administration to administration. And so really looking at those, one of the things that we do notice with public funding is that it tends to have very intensive submission processes that can sometimes be complex and need to be followed to the T. So usually when talking to individuals about specifically going after public funding, I really encourage them to reach out to those who may have applied for the funding source before, who know what the ins and outs of the different submission processes are, because you will find where an individual donor or foundation may give some leeway for something. You have the wrong font type with a public submission and you can completely get thrown out just for that. So that's probably the biggest recommendation I would give on that point.
Wow, so true.
Yep. And related to, the wrong font type will kick you out. It's about doing your homework, as Don said. In corporations, it's even more specific and more important to do your homework for the main reason, I would argue, because corporations don't exist to give out money. They exist to make money. They have a product. Very different than Kira's point on, foundations, they exist here and there, but the sole purpose of the foundation is to support a community or whatever the community is, geographic community. Kira said it well. So they exist to do that work, to support nonprofit organizations or NGOs. That's why they exist. That's not why corporations exist at all. So the number one homework you need to do is to find out, are you a good fit for them to give you money? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about, are you a fit? Are you what I would call a poster child for that organization? If the company says, we do support communities and we do X, Y, and Z. If you're not X, Y, and Z, leave them alone. Because they've been very clear on where they want to give the money. And the most important thing usually with corporation, number one, is location. If they don't have any business in your location, they're not going to give you money. You're not a priority for them. Regardless of how beautiful your children are, or the dog can do tricks or whatever, if you don't fit in a priority location for them, then they're not going to give you money and you're wasting your time to reach out to them. The other thing I would argue is, can you make it a business proposition? Meaning if they do business there, maybe there's some HR, some human resource things you can do. You can get their employees engaged. Maybe they have a product that's really unique to your organization that they want to leverage that. So I'm going to stop right there and we'll talk more about other ideas with corporate engagement.
Yeah, no, I mean, all of you just kind of mentioned fit in this last, this particular question. And so I want to dig into that a little bit more, because I know from organizations I've been at, right? Like I might think I'm a fit for, let's say it's a financial institution, right? Where I'm going to go and try to get a grant from a financial institution. But maybe it's not, my mission is not the right fit, or maybe this particular round of funding, right? Like, because obviously people may have specific initiatives. Like how would I, if I'm an affiliate trying to determine not only fit for the organization, but fit for this particular ask, how am I going to determine that? So Kelly, what is your thought? Let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think a key reminder when you're looking at expanding your funding sources particularly is to keep in mind that not all money is good money. that often organizations go after funds because they're available, and they don't take into consideration whether or not it's the right fit for the organization. Two of the things that you should take into consideration is whether or not it fits your strategic plan and your organizational culture. You can go really wrong by moving too far away from who you are just because there's funding available. Another thing is that we see a lot in the public realm. They ask for you to do too much for too little money. It's very, very common with public funding that they want all of the deliverables in the world, all of the reporting every month, and they're going to give you $50,000. And you really have to determine whether or not you can deliver on what they're asking for. Another thing is that when you're pursuing a funding source, particularly public funding or anything that's going to take up a lot of your staff time, you have to consider whether or not it's the most effective use of your staff time. And I say this because we see a lot of nonprofits go after writing these 30-page complex proposals to the central government, the federal government, and they ignore the individual donor who, with a coffee and a lunch and a little bit of TLC, might be willing to give them just as much money as the federal government would, and possibly for more time. So really think about what you have in terms of staff resources and what you have in terms of time resources, and make sure that you're actually focusing on the money that is going to be the most efficient for you to get, as well as the most efficient for you to spend. The other thing that I would add, just from an international perspective, is that I think that this question really comes to a point where you have to have conversations with your board and your leadership before you start going after funding. Because when you're talking about public funding in a lot of countries, it can come with strings attached. And while in the United States, we may assume that there's no quid pro quo for funding, that's not necessarily an assumption in a lot of other countries. And so I always recommend that annually you sit down with your board members and your fundraising leadership, and you talk about what are our parameters, what are we willing to do, and what are we not willing to do for funding. And some of the things I would specifically ask you to take into consideration is, are we willing to hold campaign events? Are we willing to be featured in campaign materials? How closely are we willing to tie ourselves to one political party versus another? Some other things that may be totally fine, but you should make sure everybody's on the same page with is, if we get money from the Ministry of Health, will we put their logo on the side of our building? That's very common in many countries. You may be perfectly fine with it. Your American board members may question and say, well, why are you doing that? Is that appropriate? And so once I do it regularly, once a year, get on the same page with everybody, sit down and say, here's who we are, here's the type of funding we go after. And if anything doesn't fit in this box, if anybody asks us to do something outside of this box, we're going to say no to it, even if it's $50 million, because it's not who we are and what we stand for.
Great points. Great points. Go ahead, Bernard.
I just want to say amen, yes, 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 and 3 more yeses. Specifically on a couple of things that you said, that you're talking about public funding, but it's even more double down on corporate funding. Logos and branding. Corporations exist. I'm going to go back again. The business of business is business, and they exist to get their product out, to employ people, and to make money. I'm oversimplifying it, but that is the truth. And if they give a nonprofit money, they want their constituents to know about it. They want the community to know, we care about kids, we care about animals, we care about the environment. And the only way you're going to know about it is if the organization we gave money to tells you, puts your name out there. So they will expect branding. They will expect their logo to be out there. They will expect that. And if you're uncomfortable putting the company's logo on your materials, don't go after corporate funding. People love photographs. They love images of animals and kids. It makes us happy. So the company is probably, and Youth Federation has kids. So they're probably going to want happy photos of your children with their logo. They're probably going to want that. If you're not comfortable with that, if you say, no, we don't want to put photos of our children up there on this company site, then you may not want to give them money. And lastly, I'm going to say, and then turn it back to either Don or on to Kara, is not every company's business practices, I'll use that, fit your organization. I'm going to give you a really exact example without giving any names because I don't want to. It's an organization actually I get funding from. So it's
careful there, Bernard. Yeah.
Yep. It's a very, very big brand in athletics. Very big brand in athletics. And I know you know the brand. It's that big of a brand. I was working with several nonprofit organizations who work on youth sports. They're different organizations. And one said, oh, our lead funder is this big brand and we love them. And now we're going to do another campaign with them. They're great. They do X, Y, and Z for us. Not just money, they also provide expertise. The leader of another youth sport said, why would you ever work with them? They're horrible. Some of the things that they're doing, promoting things, saying that they want to do X, Y, and Z in the social movement world is not their place. They have no business doing this work. They need to focus on shoes or athletic wear. So yeah, our board hates them. Interesting. Two great organizations, two great organizations, but their board, and to Kelly's point earlier, talk to your board. Their board and their belief, and I'm not voting either one way or the other. One organization, we love them. We love what that they stand for. We love their spokesperson. We love their activism. Love it. The other organization, we hate it. So know what you're doing and what you're getting into, because if you don't like the politics or the actions of a company, whatever action it is, and they're pretty public. If you don't like it, then don't take their money. Don't ask them for money. That's what I mean.
Absolutely. I love it. I think you all hit on kind of alignment of everything, right? Like it's not just alignment of like, oh, this might be a good, foundation or corporation that might help me, but is it like, does it fit our objectives? Is it something the board would support? Does this fit within the parameters that we would normally have set for ourselves? Or is it not worth the time to go after it if it's really not a good fit? To Kelly's point, not all money is good money. Well, I wanted to ask another question, kind of just as you're thinking about how, people that you might have funded or if you received funding, kind of how did that come about? When we're talking about just kind of a connecting component, how does funding happen, and then how does it maintained in that sense? Kira, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think I would go back to one of Kelly's great points in terms of really thinking about, opportunity for relationships and connections are everywhere. So, don't put all of your eggs in one basket, going after one grant opportunity or one, sponsorship. Maybe there is, an individual donor or someone who's been a long-time volunteer with an organization. Think about what is currently, in your toolbox of resources, and how can you cultivate, the time, treasure, and talent that already exist, and how can, the folks in your wheelhouse, make introductions and make those, connections to other foundations or funding sources or future board members. So I think it goes back to, before you go externally and start chasing, money and opportunities, really know who you are as an organization and the resources you have at your disposal, and leverage them. It really comes down to people. That's how things happen.
For sure. Let's talk about kind of approaching people as well. I'm kind of jumping around here a bit, but as we think about how you would actually kind of formally go to approach, if I'm a new prospective grantee or that you might possibly fund me, what should I keep in mind as I'm approaching a funder? What are they really looking for? What type of information are we talking about here? Bernard, let's start with you on that one.
One of the things that Kira said it was almost a throwaway comment because she said it casually, but it's really important. And she talked about volunteer engagement. In corporations, that's extremely important, because quite often the best way to approach a company, the best way to get them to notice you is from within, from their employees. There are many companies who will only fund organizations that their employees have some type of relationship. They volunteer, they're on the board, they personally give their own money, so the company's going to match it. There are many companies who that's their way of supporting. Whoever our employees support, that's who we're going to support, period. So that's one way. So keep that in mind. If you have the opportunity, and your organizations do, to engage volunteers, do your best to engage volunteers from companies if you want to get company money, and then make sure that those volunteers tell their company, here's what I'm doing. And social media is the best place for that. Maximize social media. But here's a volunteer from Coca-Cola volunteering at our place, whatever that is. But stepping away from that, I always tell organizations when looking from corporations, and Dawn, actually, I'm going to do a quick segue. When looking at corporations, remember, or you need to know that in the total pie of nonprofit and NGO funding, corporations are the tiniest slice of pie. They are the tiniest slice of pie. So people often think, oh, it's a company. They've got lots of money. They'll give it to me. That's not true. Not true. There's that old joke about the bank robber. Well, why are you robbing banks? Because banks are where the money is. Money is not at corporations when it comes to NGOs and nonprofit organizations. So the number one place for money is public funding. Kelly's talking about that. Number two are individual funding. Number three are foundations. Foundations got zillions of dollars. And to Kira's earlier point, that's why they exist, to give out the money. Number four are the corporations that give out a very, very tiny slice of the pie. So when you're prioritizing, probably corporations won't be your top priority. That said, when reaching out to them, when you're creating a strategy, when you've already done your homework, go for a deal, not an appeal. The deal is, how is this a good business decision for your company? How is it a good business decision? If your approach is, we have beautiful children who like to grow up and be healthy, please give us money. Yeah, you're not gonna get anywhere with that. So the deal is, you're an organization who does a lot of work with youth. You sell youth clothes, or you have a youth-focused app, or you sell phones, and we know youth love phones. Whatever, you wanna get more in the youth market. We can help you with that because we have access to youth and their families. Or the appeal is, you're opening a new factory in our community. You have a lot of employees. You want to build morale in those factories. Let us create a volunteer event for your employees to be involved in the community, work together, build morale. There are different ways you can strategize on what is a deal, what do we have, what do we know, what do we do that will help this company. The company may have some PR issues, some public relations issues. Maybe they made a mistake and did something stupid, and now they're trying to improve their image. You can do that. You can help them with that. Maybe they're trying to reach out to the political community. You can help them with that. But that goes back to Kelly's point earlier. Are you willing to do that? Is that in your DNA? And if it's not, then don't. But again, we're a business. We're not a philanthropic organization. So if we're a business, approach us like a business with the deal. Then you'll have a better opportunity for that approach to be successful. And then I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that because Kelly's nodding and I think she's chomping at the bit to give us a little.
Yeah, Kelly, yeah.
I'm just nodding because everything that you're saying applies to the public sector as well. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is that because it's the public sector, the giving is totally objective, and it's really not. Most people who work in the public sector are very ambitious. Some of them rely on campaigns and elections in order to get where they are. And so just in the same way that you have corporations who are looking, they want to help kids. It doesn't mean that they don't care about kids, but they have to be able to sell your idea to others, and they need to stay in their position in order to continue to help you. And so they're always going to try and understand, how does this help me? And we tell individuals reaching out to public officials, they're looking for two things usually: votes and good PR. And as Bernard said, social media is a great way to do that because you have control over what you're sharing. You can make the decisions about whether or not you include kids or staff, those kinds of things. Very kind of tailored site visits where you are inviting the person to your facility, letting them see what's going on, giving them an opportunity. But we also really try and push people when they're thinking about public giving is, even if you've received a grant from the Ministry of Health, you should not be afraid to invite the Minister of Health for your area to come and do a check presentation or to come and speak to the community, because you would do that for an individual donor. We often think about stewarding individual donors and forget about stewarding public sources of funding. And we really have to consider that when we are going after public sources of funding, the individuals who run those departments or who appropriate those funds are essentially like a big individual donor, and they're looking for the same kind of good PR and even just for kids to smile at them, to be honest with you. One of the things that here in the United States is the most effective for getting a meeting with a senator is to take kids into the meeting, because the senator will love the fact that this is the meeting that they get to just sit and talk with kids, as opposed to all the other meetings where it's lobbyists telling them, here's what I want, here's what I want. So without using your kids as props, because we never want to encourage anybody to do that, just think about the individual who you're talking to and what is their incentive for giving to you? What is their incentive? And we like to think about it as, what's their incentive for investing in you? Because to Bernard's point, you don't necessarily want to go make an ask. You want to go and give them an opportunity. You run a great organization. It's high quality. It's a good investment. It's going to be a good use of their funds. And you know that good things are going to happen. They can't say that about every organization that they're going to give to. So if you go from the mindset of, I'm offering you this opportunity to engage in one of the high quality programs in our area, and here's what we would like to see from a relationship with you, they may not always say yes, but it's more likely that they're going to consider your offer, as opposed to Bernard's point saying, we have really beautiful kids who need a lot of help. Could you give us some money? They're hearing that 70,000 times a day. You've got to sound different, and the confidence and the willingness to partner is what's going to make you stand out and be different.
So true. Kira, is there anything, I mean, is that in alignment with what foundations would be expecting as well, as far as the approach?
I think so. Yeah, I think what Kelly, what she said at the end there is just so powerful, to come from a place of abundance and asset, as opposed to, framing yourself within this, deficit lens. All of these organizations, they have a mission, they exist because they're so purpose driven. And so what is it? What are you doing to make this world a better place? And come to your foundation ask, your corporate ask, your government ask, individual, come from that place of abundance, and give people the opportunity to invest in you.
So true.
Both Kira and Kelly are so on point. They're making me think of other stuff, which is good and bad, because I know we're on a time constraint. But one of the things I want to talk about just briefly is competition, because quite often nonprofit organizations are so caught up with the work that they do in their staff and their impact and their outcomes, and that they forget that when asking for something, you're asking for something that everybody else is asking for, everybody else. And we get, as nonprofits, we get caught up on, but we're the only ones who have 10-year-olds. We're the only ones who play basketball. We're the only ones who, whatever that it is. As a corporation, we don't care. We don't care. So as a corporation, we're opening a new factory in Wakanda. And we know that we've earmarked $100,000 to give to NGOs in Wakanda. That's what we're gonna do. We don't care about basketball. We don't care about their kids. What's the best place for us to invest our money in Wakanda? What's the best city? What's the best region? What's the best whatever? What do we got out there? And so when you're hanging your hat on, we won the basketball championship. The corporation does not care, unless they make basketballs, which they probably don't. They don't care that you're the best whatever. So your deal needs to make the most sense to a corporation. You need to make sure, because they get meetings, they get requests from everybody. They're only going to give to a handful, maybe one. So how do you compete? How do you make yourself look the best? That's what you need to consider on, do you bring the kids to the meeting, to Kelly's point? Do you highlight why they're the best investment in that location. Or if it is an organization that says we care about youth and youth is our number one priority, great. There are 27 other youth organizations here. Why you? That's what you need to think about.
Perfect. Well, we have, I want to make sure we have time for audience questions, but I do want to ask one more. So I'm going to just kind of preface that for everyone. If you haven't put your questions in the chat, please go ahead and do so now. And then I want to ask one more question myself, and then we'll start to kind of incorporate some more in. But thinking about kind of, you know, we've got this expert panel here. I'm thinking about what kind of insiders kind of view or points that you all might be able to share that are things that probably aren't readily shared from your particular perspectives, but with things that would be really helpful for like an affiliate to know. So Bernard, let's start with you on that one.
Oh, insider. Okay, that's a whole hour conversation right there, but I'm gonna give you
so true.
Transparency matters. Transparency matters. Kira's probably gonna talk about this because it's really relevant in her world, but most corporations do not accept unsolicited requests. Foundations are really big on that. You know, we do this work, but we're going to do the research. Corporations, for the most part, do research and then put a letter of intent out, a request for proposals to decide. In order for them to decide on who they want to ask, who wants to ask, they do research. They want transparency. What happens at your organization? The very first place they go, the very first place is your website. That's where they go first. So make your website compelling. Storytelling grabs the heart. Too often our websites go for the head. Here's the data, here's the results, here's what we're done. But it doesn't make your heart say, oh, I love that organization. I want to be a piece of that. I want our brand associated with that. So make sure your website is compelling. Make sure you're transparent as much as possible with your financials. And then the last part is tell stories of what you do, not just the numbers. Too often we focus on the numbers because for years everyone said we need to know your impact, we need to know your impact, which is great and true. But if you don't put something that tells a story, then that doesn't go any further. And then last but not least, inside is at the end of the day, from a corporation, they're probably going to fund 10%. 8 to 10% of the requests they receive. So keep in mind that if they say no, it may be just the fact that they ran out of money or you're not as competitive as the other ones. That does not mean you can't come back again in 6 months or come back again a year later. And ask them that. They may not be able to answer that or they may not answer period. But always, if they say no, and 90% of the time they will, find out if you can ask again.
Perfect. Anything else real quick to add to that, Kelly or Kira, before we switch over to audience questions?
I think it's exactly right on. I would say with public funding, the other two things that I see are not really well known is that often public sources of funding tend to be more focused on how the money is going to be used than what's going to come of the money. They want to know, but their biggest anxiety is, am I going to get caught up in an audit? Is somebody come along and say that I made an award that wasted taxpayer dollars? And so in order to set yourself out as somebody who's going to be a responsible user of funds, you can do all the things that we've talked about before. But one thing to take into consideration is the power of the right letter of support from somebody in the government or a VIP, somebody who's known, the same way that you would have references on your resume, is kind of a stamp of approval that says, I put my name behind these people. And so I guarantee that if you support them, it's not going to come back and blow up in your face. And I find that that's the biggest anxiety for public officials who are looking at funding decisions is, will this show up on the front page of the newspaper saying that it was a bad investment on our part?
Perfect. Well, I think let's take a pause here for just a minute and we'll check with the chat box and see what kind of questions. I have like 10 more for each. I think we could be here for a couple of hours, but let's pause for just a minute. is, should you ever stretch or bend your organization to fit a funding criteria, assuming that it's in the youth field, right, that you're in youth services, but how far, if any, should you be able to stretch? I don't know who wants to kind of chime in on that one. Both Bernard and Kira, they've got looks in their eyes. Okay, Bernard, go ahead.
I'll go, and then some, Kira or Kelly may have a counterpoint and say, Bernard, we disagree. But my point is no, no, and no. I didn't say never, but I said no, no, and no. So here's the scoop. And this applies probably to several questions along that line. You have a lot of competition. You may not think you do. You have a lot of competition. And the funders can't even fund 20% of the requests they get. People who are perfectly in line with what they want to fund. So these organizations, it's my foundation funds calico cats, and you are an organization that does chihuahuas. Okay, we got more requests that we can get for calico cats. We can't fund all of them. Now you're gonna say, but we're close to a calico cat. We're actually a brindle chihuahua, which the coloring works and they're four-legged and they're cute. So yeah, we fit. Or we'll get a couple of calico cats to come and join our program. Don't do it. Just don't. Be true to who you are. Stop.
So true. Kira, did you have something else to add?
Well, it's hard to top that, but commit to your mission and stay course with what you do. So Bernard said it perfectly. I would, say no. Commit to who you are and be true to yourself.
Kelly?
Dawn, if I can add, I definitely agree that you should not look at a single funding opportunity and decide, oh, we normally serve kids of this age range. We're going to reach out and try and serve a different age range because of this funding opportunity. But I do think it's good to be paying attention to where the overall giving is going and to determine whether or not from a strategic level, you are needing to adapt what you're doing to meet either government sources or private sources because they're starting to move in a different direction. But again, as we talked about in the session earlier, you always want to bring that back to your strategic plan. You always want to bring that back to working with your board, your advisory committee, and your staff to make sure that it's being done intentionally and towards the best benefit for your youth, not just because somebody put out a proposal and you think, oh, I could serve kids that are 5 years older than my kids and maybe get $100,000. That almost never works out for anybody.
It's true. It's so true. This one is kind of a related question from Astrid, where again, is it kind of, does it fit? Is it worth pursuing foundations? I guess Kira will toss this one to you. Is it worth pursuing foundations if the organization's not in their geographic focus?
I would have to say that's a no as well. Foundations that do focus on a certain geographic region, they're committed to that. That is part of their mission. And so it wouldn't make sense to pursue that funding opportunity.
Great. Okay. Another question we have from John in the UK. Having lots of income from one sponsor or foundation can leave you vulnerable. But having it from too many can make stability hard work. Is there an optimum, right? Is there kind of as you're thinking about your overall strategy for fundraising? I know, Bernard, you mentioned, corporations are not necessarily where the bulk of the money comes from. Like, how do you make sure that you've got a proper balance here?
So John's question is a really, really good question. And the answer, of course, depends organization to organization to organization. What I like to think of is, especially when working with program officers and foundations and working with corporations, you're working with actual people. Yes, it's an institution, a corporation or foundation, but your communication and your relationship is with the person. How many relationships can you manage? So you may say, oh, we've got 30 or 40 partners. This is great. Okay, what's your team look like? Are there 5 people working with those 30 or 40 officers, or is it just you? Because you can effectively manage a relationship with 40 people, not on your own. You need help to do that. So what is your bandwidth personally? What is your staff, your team's bandwidth? Because there are many nonprofits I know that have 40 corporate partners and 100 foundations. but there's a large team working on that. So it's not all on one person's shoulder. So this is not giving you a direct answer, John, on yes, you should have 3 partners and call it a day. Because
right. Hard.
Life doesn't work that way. But yeah, if you spread yourself too thin to try and get more, that's a recipe for disaster. Just as you only have one, if that one goes, you're in trouble.
So true. We have a question about what is a top tip or success story you've had from fundraising? This is from Tim, like kind of access, cultivation. Is there a tip that you all have about fundraising? Kelly or Kira, you want to chime in on that one?
Well, it's actually kind of following along on Bernard's point, and then kind of to answer this question, I do think that this session is focusing on corporations, foundations, and public funding, but it's obviously, there's a whole nother section that you guys are talking about in other sessions about individual giving and like the ongoing monthly contribution type thing. And so I think that it's really important when you are balancing out the resources that it takes to go after a foundation or a public source of funding or a corporation to make sure that you're not doing all of that at the expense of the individual donors, the fundraising, and those types of activities, because those can be more stable. Particularly, you know, we work in public funding. Public funding is obviously affected by elections and the politics and the situation. You may have gotten a source of funding for 10 years and tomorrow it might be gone. And whereas if you're cultivating relationships with large donors or even multiple relationships on monthly sponsorships, you can have a little bit more of a sense of where you might be 4 years or 5 years from now. So everything that we're talking about should not be 100% of your focus. It really should be about balancing that with the individual giving. And the top tip that I would say is talk to your individual donors. Find out what made them want to give to you and use them as a resource to be able to engage other donors, but do not make them do all the work. This is the thing that we see with board members all the time. And everybody expects their board members to go out and solicit all of these funds, but gives them no resources, no training, no material on how to do it. The best version I've seen is an organization that created like a fundraiser in a box for all of their board members. And all the board member had to do was invite people over to their house, put out a cheese plate, have a couple bottles of wine, and then all of the materials were there. There was a PowerPoint presentation or a video that they could show. It was essentially like a Tupperware party that was right there, ready for them to be able to present to their friends. And so they felt very confident and they loved it. They got a lot of great feedback on it and they kept coming back and wanting to do more and more of those. So make it really, really easy for your main advocates to be able to talk about what you do and to not have to kind of struggle for what about this, what about that? And then the other thing is always be present with them. If they are going to do an event like that, have staff there so that they're not out on their own feeling like if somebody asks me a question and I don't know the answer, I'm stuck.
Absolutely. I think this has been a great conversation. We're pretty much out of time here. I've got several more questions kind of about addressing companies that are in your backyard, about matching opportunities and even kind of post-pandemic environment. So I will be sure, everyone, that these questions we haven't gotten to, I'll be sure to pose these to our experts here and email you those after the conference. But I want to thank our amazing panel for joining us today. Thank you all so much. This has been such a great conversation. I know based on the questions, there's probably plenty of opportunity for us to do more sessions in the future on this outside of the conference. So thank you again. I would like to remind everyone to fill out the session evaluation and then go ahead and click to take us to the next session. Thank you all.